Good afternoon, everybody. We're just about to get started. I'm Jennifer Delk. I'm with the League of Women Voters Austin area, and I'm their Community Relations Director. I'm also a Travis County Volunteer Deputy Registrar. A few orders of business. We will be broadcasting this to Facebook. If you are on Facebook, there's a slight time delay. For those of you who have joined us on Zoom, we'll be doing periodic Q&A breaks. If there's something you have a question about, feel free to use the Q&A feature to ask your question. If you see that somebody's already asked your question, you can vote up a question by hitting that thumbs up button. Another option, if you have anything to share, you can put it in the comments. And with that, we'll move forward. Today is session 3, researching your ballot and how to cast your vote in our Civics 101 series. So a little bit about the League of Women Voters. We are open to everyone. It's a nonpartisan political organization. We encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government, and we influence public policy through education and advocacy. A few things that you may have seen us out and about doing: voter registration services, get out the vote. We publish the voter's guide. We add content to Vote 411. We have candidate forums, high school voter education and registration. We do policy presentations, and like today, we are doing civics education programs. Today, we're going to talk about researching your ballot, who and what are on your ballot, and where can you get unbiased information. But before we get started on that, we need to make sure that you're registered at your current address. The registration deadline for the November 3rd election is Monday, October 5th. So you can't take a geography class without being you can't take the test without being registered for the class. So you can't vote unless you're registered. So let's get started on that. We did have a presentation a couple weeks ago on voter registration, but this is the recap. How do I know if I'm already registered to vote? How do I register to vote in my county? Well, go to votetexas.gov. That's a website that you can check for counties in Texas. Voter registration is county specific, so you have to make sure you're registered in the right county. For those of us who are joining us from outside of Texas, I suggest you check your Secretary of State website. So, ways you can register in Texas are in person with a volunteer deputy registrar. You might have heard them called VDRs. They're around Travis County. You can get registered at the tax office. And then the League of Women Voters is hosting contactless drive-through registrations at the Alamo Draft House Slaughter Lane, September 21st and 2nd, and then September 28th and 9th from 12 to 7 p.m. Another option for Travis County is to text register to 48383. And you'll get a link to fill out a voter registration form. Then the tax office will mail you a form. You sign, date it, send it back in a postage paid envelope. But you need to have that postmarked by October 5th. So please remember that this is going to involve 2 things being mailed. They'll mail you something and you have to mail it back. So if we're inching closer to that October 5th deadline, you're going to want to visit a VDR in person. Next step is that you're going to look for your voter registration certificate in the mail. This year they are orange, and you don't want to lose that card. That card, you can take it with you to vote as proof of registration. If you don't have your card in time for voting, if you registered with a VDR, they will give you a receipt that will count as proof of registration at the polls. So, next step, researching your ballot. We're going to talk about who and what are on your ballot and where can you get unbiased information. Back to votetexas.gov. You can find out exactly what's on your ballot there. And I checked out what's on the ballot, and it's based on where you live. So here we have your voter registration card, and these funny little numbers here actually map to geography. Last week we had a great talk by Mary Patrick with Women for Good Government, and she broke down exactly what those little numbers meant. So here we're looking at the congressional districts, and number 10 corresponds with that little spot on the map. Here's a breakdown of what the card looks like. As I said before, the numbers are ballot positions linked to where you live. So November 2020 is a general election. So you're going to see everything from US president all the way down to local initiatives. So something that you may have heard is down ballot voting. So at the top, you have the federal level positions like president, senator, US representatives, houses of Congress. So for the state, you will have our Congress, along with the railroad commissioner, justices, various court positions. And then at the local level, we're looking at district attorneys, the sheriff, county commissioners, constable. So if you ever heard the term down ballot, that's what this means. So as you've noticed, this is a pretty lengthy ballot that we're looking at. And you'll find out exactly what is on your ballot by visiting the Vote Texas site. So how do you figure out who to vote for? I can't tell you who to vote for. The League, as I said, is nonpartisan. We're here to provide you the information so you can make an informed decision. So the best thing you can do for yourself is to seek credible sources of information. There's the voter's guide. Various entities, including the League of Women Voters, are hosting candidate forums where you'll see people go head-to-head answering questions. You can also ask friends, family, and community members. There's news outlets, social media, and then grassroots organizations. So the League of Women's Voters Guide is a printed guide, but it's also online. It's going to give you a full listing of where to vote, how to vote, and then it's going to go into who's running for each office. And then the League has asked them a couple of questions, and the responses are printed here. The League's Voter's Guide is going to be available on October 9th online in English, and then we'll have various languages available, Spanish, Chinese, and Vietnamese on the 13th. And then on October 16th, you'll see the English print version inserted in the Chronicle. So this is all related to getting the paper print version. Another option is to go to Vote 411. That is an online website managed by the National League of Women Voters. You'll be able to access voting information in 4 languages. Basically, you go online, you'll enter it in your address, and based on your address, like I said before, it'll tell you exactly who is on your ballot. So back to the voter's guide. This is a copy of our voter's guide. As you can see, this is the position for county commissioner. I pulled this from the primary elections. So it has 4 questions that we asked both candidates, and then it'll list the precincts that the candidates are in. So this precinct 3 links back up to your card, and it'll list the background, the education. They'll give you your website, so that way you can take a look at the candidates side by side, kind of like when you look at, say, Sears to order a new washer and dryer set. You might be looking at a couple of different brands, and so you can do a side-by-side comparison to see which one works best for you. As I mentioned before, there are candidate forums. The League is having city council candidate forums for District 2, 4, 10, 6, and 7 over the next couple weeks. You can see them online, on demand, or on several television broadcast stations. Another way that you can do homework is to hop online. And as I mentioned before, check out your grassroots organizations. I personally take a look at like some of the grassroots that I may have a personal affiliation with and see if they are endorsing any candidates. You'll see endorsements from, say, your favorite news outlet, the Austin Chronicle, perhaps various other news. As far as looking at the down ballot all the way back up to national, you might have an affiliation with a local chapter of something that would be endorsing local candidates. And then you can also check out the national to see if they're endorsing federal candidates. So you don't have to do this work alone. Somebody out there has already done some research in the same way that the League has in asking questions and gathering responses and posting them. So the next thing that you need to do is write down your selections. You're going to find out that when you go to the voting booth, you cannot bring your phone. Electronic media is not allowed in the voting booth. You're going to have to bring in some paper. You can bring in your voter's guide with you with your little notes on there, the notes you need to keep personal. One thing to remember in this November election with the new voting machines is there's no longer a straight party option for voting. You're going to have to click each individual box. Okay, so we're going to take a little break here and we're going to talk a little bit about, we'll answer some questions. I saw that one came in so far. Let's see. We had a question. Someone had read, oh, there it is. Straight ticket question. Yeah, that is relatively new. That came in, I believe, when the new voting machines came in. So you actually get more options by not having to choose straight ticket. So the most important thing, which we'll get into later, is to make sure that once you've made your selections, to go back at the end and verify that the people that you selected are the people on your final ballot that you submit. Does anybody else have any questions with regards to researching your ballot, or if anybody may have hopped in late? Are there options for write-in candidates? That one I'm not quite sure about. Valerie, do you have an answer about the write-in?
Yeah, in Texas, you can't write somebody in like randomly with a pencil. They have to actually apply to be on the ballot as a write-in candidate, which I know sounds absurd, but that is the way it works.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, and the deadlines to be a write-in candidate, I'm pretty sure have passed. Does anybody else have any questions on researching your ballot? One thing I forgot to mention when I said asking your friends is to ask a friend who's in an industry. For example, I have some lawyer friends that have, actually done work with some of the candidates for judge or district attorney. So it does help to get some help from your friends. Okay, so with that, I'm going to move forward onto the casting your vote part. And once again, for those of you who joined late, we are using the Q&A feature. So for starters, okay, wait, I'll answer this quick question about the bringing in your voter's guide. As far as I know, as long as you are using your voter's guide, it's on paper, it's not on your phone, you're allowed to use your voter's guide. Can't share it with anybody, show it to anybody else. Propositions and bonds will be in the voter's guide as well. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead and move on to casting your vote. And I will collect the questions in the Q&A to the next stopping point. So Kieran, where we're going to talk about what ID you need, when early voting is, when the polls are open, how do you find a polling location, how does voting work, and how to get an absentee vote ballot by mail. I highly suggest that as part of your research, you make your own voting plan to make sure that you have all your stuff together. Kind of like when you go on vacation, you come up with well, I need this ID to get through the checkpoint or TSA, I need this, don't forget your sunscreen if you're gonna go to the beach, like treat voting like you would anything else that you plan for. So what ID do you need? There's a whole list of IDs, but the main point about your ID that you take to the voting booth is that it's to prove who you are, to ensure that no one else is coming in to vote as you. So it's only verifying who you are. There's been a lot of questions about the address on the IDs and various other things, but the biggest thing is that it's to make sure that when I go to the voting booth that Jennifer Delk is the person actually casting the ballot. So things you can bring are Texas driver's license, election ID certificate, personal ID card. If you do not have one of these items, please double check that you have it before you go to vote. There are several assistance groups out there who will help people get IDs, but it's very important to have one of these forms of IDs. Next up is polling locations and times. We're focused on the Travis and Williamson County areas, but for those of you who are outside of Travis and Williamson County, visit your Secretary of State or Elections Office website to find the most current list of early voting sites and election day sites. With COVID, there's been a number of sites that have been moved or changed. So please check online before planning to go to, say, your favorite church or school site. So here, early voting has been extended from October 13th to October 30th. There'll be a sign outside that says vote here. On election day, there are a number of sites that are usually not the same as the early voting sites. And the poll sites are open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. except for Sunday. One important thing that you should know is that you need to be in line by 7 p.m. Kind of like when you go shopping in some stores where you have to be in before the doors close and they'll still let you check out. That's how voting works as well. If you're in line by 7 p.m. on election day, they have to let you vote. And they'll stay open until everyone in line by 7 has voted. In Travis and Williamson County, you can visit the various election websites to see the polling locations and wait times. I highly suggest coming up with a voting plan to vote early, and you'll notice which times are peak times, usually first thing in the morning, end of the day, and at lunch. So if you're able to pick an alternative time to vote, you won't have to wait in line. So on election day, I'm not sure how many of you made it out during the primaries and during the runoffs, but the click wheel voting machines are gone, and there's a new process for getting checked in. So you'll check in with your ID. Once again, they should be verifying that you are you. You'll receive a ballot card. You'll feed the card into the ballot machine, and you'll make your selections on the touchscreen. And then you'll get your ballot back in paper. And when you take a look at it, you'll see all your selections, and you want to verify that all your picks for candidates and your propositions match what you typed in. If it doesn't match, you should talk to somebody who works the polls to get you a new ballot. Don't drop it in the machine until you're satisfied that your candidates and ballot match what you plan on selecting. And then you'll drop it into a scanner. And if you want to see a demonstration of the voting machines, you can use the QR code. You can also check online to see what is available as far as video. As far as COVID safety and special accommodations, we'll talk more about voting in your home, which is the safest option. But if you have to make it to the polls, I suggest going to early voting, wear a mask, bring your own hand sanitizer. There was social distancing, plexiglass screens to protect yourself and the poll workers, along with finger coverings for the touch screens, and hand sanitizer available, but you should make sure to bring your own stuff in the same way. When you go to the beach, you bring your own sunscreen, make sure you have yourself covered when you go to vote. Curbside voting is available to voters who are physically unable to enter the polling place. Curbside voting is not new. That's always been an option to get someone to contact the election judge inside to provide special accommodations in the same way that you would have someone come out to help you with curbside voting. You can get assistance inside. If you need assistance with disability or access or language barriers, audio capabilities, wheelchair accessibility, private assistance. I will say there's been a recommendation if you can bring your own headset, if you need audio assistance, they use a standard headset jack. So I would suggest, just because of COVID, to bring your own, just to make sure that you're safe. Let's see. We'll be talking a little bit more about special accommodations next week's session. So vote by mail, absentee voting, or ballot by mail. There's been a lot of discussion about this, so I will go over it now versus waiting until next week. There is a deadline to get this, so you really want to pay attention to these slides. So in Texas, you have to have a reason for voting by mail. It's been deemed that a voter can request a vote by mail if they have a disability, and the elections office has no legal authority to require voters to verify their visibility. Don't write it in, just check the box. If you have one, then you would qualify for vote by mail. You need to fill out and return the application by October 23rd. Once again, we're using the US Postal Service, so you want to make sure that you get it in early. Do not wait to the last minute. You want to check in with your county on the status of the application as well. After you request your ballot by mail, the ballot will be mailed to you as soon as it's processed through the system. And once, I believe it's before early voting starts, some of those start coming in. The ballot must be postmarked by election day and received by 5 p.m. And these are the contacts for the Travis and Williamson County offices. If you have any questions, if you've submitted for ballot by mail, you can check the status by contacting the office. I will say that you will probably want to go ahead and hand deliver your ballot if possible, or take it directly to the post office as early as possible. You must hand deliver your own ballot at a county approved location. There are no drop boxes in Texas for your voting applications. For those of you who are voting outside of Texas, this may be an option for you, but inside Texas, we don't have a drop box. You'll have to hand deliver your ballot and present an acceptable form of identification. And Travis County currently has one location set up, and they are working on having drive-through options. You'll have to check the elections website in order to find out if there are alternate locations for you to drop off your ballot. Okay, a couple of other things. If you have requested ballot by mail and you somehow lose your application or you haven't received it, you're going to want to vote in person. And you'll want to do that as early as you discover that you do not have this information. You want to check in and tell the poll worker that you didn't receive or lost your ballot, and the poll worker will cancel your ballot by mail. Now, there is a chance that you may have to vote provisionally if that information is missing. And what provisional voting is that you may not see the full ballot that you would have been scheduled to vote otherwise. There may, oh, no, sorry. Valerie, can you clarify provisional voting? Sorry.
When you vote provisionally, it's generally because, right, there's something about your ability to vote that they're not 100% sure is correct. And so it's a paper ballot. You still get to vote for everything that's on your ballot. I think Jennifer is thinking of a limited ballot, which is restricted, right, which is a whole different situation and doesn't apply to this. But a provisional ballot will be a piece of paper, and it has to go like in an envelope that then like you and the poll worker sign. It's a whole thing. And then if you're voting provisionally because you don't have your mail ballot to surrender, you don't have to follow that up with anything. But in other circumstances where you vote provisionally, like maybe you don't have proof of identity or something, you do have to follow up on that, and it won't be counted unless you do follow up on that with the elections office.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, and I did mix up the two. Okay. So that is part A of the I applied for ballot by mail and I've either lost it or I haven't received it. Now, the other option is that you may have decided to request absentee voting, but then you decide to vote in person. So in that case, you'll want to find a polling location as soon as you can, early vote if possible, and then you want to take your unmarked ballot to the polling location and turn it into the clerk. They'll cancel your ballot and then you'll vote in person. So those are your two options if you do have to come in and vote. It's very important not to lose the ballot by mail. Okay, special circumstances at the polls. There are plenty of people there to assist you. If you need help, for starters, talk to the people at the actual voting location. There's the election protection hotline if it turns out that there is something that is that you're unsure about related to your voting rights. You can get rides to the polls with vote riders. As I said before, if you need help getting an ID sometime between now and early voting, contact Spread the Vote. If you have questions about disability access, Rev Up Texas. is a great group that can help out. And as far as private assistance goes, we'll talk about it a little more next week, is that voters can bring a family member or interpreter. And then you need to let the poll workers know ahead of time before you get, like when you get up in there to check in, you need to let them know that you need assistance. Like don't go all the way into the polls and then have someone help you vote. You need to clear it in advance, and they'll administer an oath of assistance. So Q&A for casting your vote. There's a couple of questions in the chat. There was a question on, if you live in Williamson County, can you vote at a Travis County polling location?
No. You must vote in your county, but Williamson County and Travis County both currently have countywide polling places, which means that during early voting, you can vote anywhere, but also on election day, you do not have to go to your precinct, but you do want to make sure that you're in the right county.
That's right. Elections, as I mentioned before, are county specific, even to the point where you're registered. If you happen to live in Texas, move somewhere else in Texas, but it's not in the same county, you're going to have to make sure you're registered in the county that you want to vote in. Let's see.
And then we had another question about if poll workers have ever tried to stop someone from bringing in their voter guide. And I can say unequivocally, yes. It generally does not happen in your more urban counties, just because they tend to have more robust training for their poll workers. But we have gotten calls on the voter assistance hotline that are from people who are complaining that they're not being allowed to bring written materials with them, and specifically the league guide.
Interesting.
And generally, if you call the voter protection line that was mentioned earlier, they will get on the phone with the election judge and explain to them, no, this is what state law says, you are allowed to bring that. And that usually clears it up. So
yeah. So it's very important, if you see something or have an issue, say something. Don't vote, or don't get in a position where you compromise your vote. You should stay there and at least get assistance from the election worker, escalate to the election judge, call the election protection hotline. Don't get to the point where you don't get to make your vote with your list, like, because there's no going back with your vote. Once you cast your ballot, then it's over. So the number for the election protection hotline is 866-RVOTE. And in Texas, the great group, the Texas Civil Rights Project, is behind that hotline here. 866-RVOTE is a national number. So for those of you outside Texas experiencing issues at the polls, they are there to help you. Frequently, they have somebody actually at the polls outside in the parking lot, and they're there to help you with any questions you might have. Do we have any other questions about casting your vote? As I said before, next week we'll take a deeper dive as to who is in your polling place, who can help out, how to work at the polling place if you're interested.
There is a question in the chat about finding information on bonds and propositions in the voter's guide, and that's going to vary, again, based on where you are. If you're somewhere that there's not a league presence with a local chapter, then probably not. If you are someplace like Travis County or Williamson County, odds are really good you will, because those leagues are active and they're doing the research and all of that. But if you're somewhere that's fairly rural and doesn't have an active league chapter, odds are good that anything that's super specific to your area might not be on there.
Yeah, so as I said before, this is where you start looking to your friends, your colleagues, your local grassroots organizations, other news media. I can tell you that the League of Wome Voters Austin area will be doing, we'll have propositions in our voters guide, the proposition A and B. Another group that'll have that is the Austin Common, our local nonpartisan news. So there are groups that are going to put out this information. So for example, I'll pick something random. Say for example, you have some sort of bond or proposition related to like clean water and streams. You might check out and see what, say, like your local Sierra Club might have to say about these propositions. There is usually some group out there that has an opinion on something related to a change in government. So that's where I would start if you're in an area that you don't have access to, say, a League of Women Voters guide that has that information. Someone out there has been going to the city council meetings and following these bonds. Okay, so we have a question in the chat from Paloma. She wanted to know, as long as you have your ID, you can vote, even if you forget your voter registration card. That is a true fact. You do not need your voter's registration card. I know a lot of us lose those. It is helpful to have your voter registration card at the polls on the off chance that they look you up in the computer system and they can't find you. So it will help things be a little more expeditious when moving through the polling location if something happens with their computer system. Or if perhaps you've recently moved and something didn't get updated. It's rare, but it's best to have the card. And
yes,
also,
but don't feel like you can't vote if you don't have it with you, because you will be allowed to vote.
Yeah. One concern, though, I remember talking about this before, Valerie, is if you haven't received a card in a while and your mail doesn't happen to get to you, you could potentially end up on a voter purge list, potentially because you aren't receiving mail from the county, right?
Right. If they send you, and it doesn't just have to be voting related, it can be anything from the county. So like a jury summons or like a traffic ticket court notice or something. I mean, anything that's from the county official mail. If it bounces and gets sent back to the county, returned as undeliverable, they'll make another attempt, but then if they fail again, they'll put you on what's called suspense. And that just means that they're not positive that you still live where you said you lived. And if you just go vote, they'll say you're on suspense. Do you still live where you said you lived? And you say yes, and then everything's fine. Or you update your address and everything's fine. But if you don't vote for long enough after you're on suspense, then you are removed from the rolls. And that's unfortunately something that happened to a lot of folks in 2018, just because they hadn't voted since the presidential election in 2012, and it just wasn't something that they thought they needed to pay attention to.
Yeah, so that's why we say pay attention to your voter registration card, because if it turns out that you're not getting them, then that means that something is wrong with your mail. And right now we're kind of experiencing some mail issues, so you want to make sure that you're up to date and current. It's best to check your voter registration online to make sure that they still have you there, and it would also note if your registration is in suspense when you do the voter lookup.
Yes. And you will get a new card automatically every 2 years at the end of the odd numbered year. So like everybody should have gotten one in late December or early January of this year, late December of last year, that was orange and white. And that will replace the one from the previous 2 years that was yellow and white. And it'll say on it that it expires at the end of 2021, but that doesn't mean that you have to register to vote again. It just means that that card isn't valid and they'll send you a new one. So you'll automatically get them as long as you don't move and you keep voting.
Yep. Do we have any other questions about casting your vote? No? Okay. So a couple of other important things that are going on right now. We have the 2020 census. And so what the census does is every 10 years is it counts everyone living in the United States. It's not just voters, it's everyone. And it helps determine federal funding for schools, roads, and emergencies. It also determines political representation. So as I said before, your voter registration card has numbers. Those numbers are related to geographical areas. So you might hear of a term called redistricting. That's when they've come up with a count of the humans living in an area. They might redraw some lines as far as the representation to make sure that you don't have a person representing a district of 10 people over here and then another person representing a district of like 3,000 on the other side. So they're going to try and basically resize the containers to match who actually lives there. Because over time people move. You know, you have a shift in land use here or there. We have less farms. So of course you're gonna, change and actually represent where the people are, because our political representation, they actually represent constituents. So The other thing is that a lot of people are concerned about answering the census. There is no citizenship question, and your personal information is not shared in any way. The census is kind of isolated from other government entities to prevent the share of your personal information. One thing I like about the census as a scientist is that it's gathering tons of data that is accessible not just by the government, but a ton of studies. If you've ever read the newspaper and it says, according to the blah 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 census, there's X amount of people here. Like, the census is used for more than you think. The new census deadline is September 30th. So if you haven't filled out the census, please do. You want to go to 2020census.gov. And it is based on household and where people were sleeping on April 1st. Okay, the other thing that we're kind of looking into is getting more election workers. If you are interested in working in the 2020 election at a poll, you can go to lwvaustin.org poll worker or use the QR code.
All right, and we've got a couple other questions that came in while you were talking about the census. What if I lose my voter registration card? If you've lost your card and you're not sure of your voter registration status, I would look yourself up online. If everything is correct and fine, you're probably fine, but you can call the county and ask them to send you a new one. But you don't have to have it. So if if you are pretty confident that, you voted 5 times in the same place and you're pretty sure you're going to show up when they go check you in, it's not a super high priority, but again, you want to make sure that your records are still good. So I would check online. And then another question was, can someone who registered at 17 years and 10 months vote at early voting before they turn 18? Turn 18 on 10/18, can they vote on 10/13? Yes, absolutely. My birthday is actually October 29th, so I pay attention to this sort of thing. And yes, if you are 18 on election day, you can vote at whatever point you can vote for that election. So even if you're not technically 18 yet when you vote, legally speaking, you're voting on November 3rd.
If you just have to make sure that you're registered by the deadline.
Right.
Which is inching up.
Yes.
Do we have any other questions? As I mentioned before, civic session number 4 is next week, Saturday at 10 a.m. We've changed up the time because there's a couple of other things happening next Saturday. If you missed out on the previous sessions, we have them online at the League's YouTube channel. Session 1 was voter registration. Session 2 was the geography of your government, which is talking about the voter registration card, or as I like to call it, the voting decoder key, that kind of lines up where you live and who you get to vote for, or what you get to vote for. Upcoming civic sessions, we are going to be talking a little bit about Know Your Vote. So as I mentioned, the very long list of people to vote for on your ballot, we're gonna break down who those people are, what their jobs are, who they work with, to give you a little bit of background on why it's important to vote for them and why it's important they'll be working with you long term. So once they're in office, they work for you. They're representing you in various arenas. We have city council, they'll be representing you. We have people in the Senate, we have people in the House, we have people in the AASD board. You're voting them into office to work for you. Let's see. Do we have any more questions? Okay. Well, I don't have anything else, so we'll open it up to some more Q&A if anybody has any questions or needs some tips on developing their voting plan. I'm working on my voting plan right now. Sarah and I had a little discussion earlier about we aren't ready yet. Things I do know is that I'll be doing early voting. Usually I do day 1 of early voting. I'll have my, as soon as the voter's guide comes out, I'll break it down into small chunks. I'll get my huge ballot and I will give myself one thing to research a day. I kind of try and make it so I don't have to eat the whole elephant at once. Just one little item per day. Ahead of the game in the propositions because I have been helping out advocacy with some of the proposition language that's going in the league guide. So I'm ahead of the curve there. Valerie, what's your voting plan? Do you have one?
Yeah, actually, my husband and I are voting by mail. So we fill it out as soon as it shows up and mail it back in.
Excellent. Let's see. Okay, how can I find my nearest polling place? If you are, well, no matter where you are, you should go to your Secretary of State website. If you happen to live in Travis County, you would go to votetravis.com. Williamson County, they have a website, and they will all have a list of polling places. Some people will have a map. Travis County has a great little map that even has the wait times. I like to vote at the one closest to my house.
Yeah, but the wait times are super helpful, because like if you get there and there's a huge long line, I did that at a Randall's once. I just held up my phone. I was like, there's a Randall's a mile that way where there's 3 people waiting and half the line left. So I mean, it was super handy.
Got it. Somebody had a question. Is this, can we pick up paper copies? Is that picking up paper copies of the voter's guide? I'm assuming it's related to the voter's guide. So yes, you can pick up paper copies of the voter's guide. They'll be printed in the Austin Chronicle in English, I believe on the 16th. Hold on, let me scroll up in my presentation. I do have the official. Okay, it'll be in the October 16th print version of the Austin Chronicle. We'll have a list that'll come out as far as distribution sites. Some of it'll change because, as you guys know, previously we were in all the public libraries and rec centers, and a lot of the libraries are currently only doing curbside. So we'll be posting on our website where you can get copies. Okay, another question. Is there anything you could possibly do wrong at the polls to make your vote ineligible or revoke your ballot? I'll go to Valerie on this one.
Well, the most important thing is to remember to put it in the tabulating machine. That's actually a huge problem that they had with the propositions last year when the machines were new, is that people would put the ticket in the machine, vote their ballot, it would split the ballot out, and then they would walk off with it. And so they had to rearrange like the order in which you passed the machine, so they made sure that it was at a bottleneck where they could make sure everybody put it in the machine. But no, once your ballot is cast, it is cast. And because it's on a machine like that, it's not going to let you like choose 2 candidates for the same office or something like that. Like could happen with paper, it has happened with paper ballots where you accidentally vote twice in the same race because you didn't realize that it wasn't a different race, or you make a stray mark and they can't tell which one you actually meant, that sort of thing. But the machines that we have now won't let you do that. So if your ballot is accepted enough that the machine spits it out, it's a valid ballot.
Yeah, and usually if you were not going to be allowed to vote, you wouldn't get to the point where you would be casting a ballot. Like, for example, you're not allowed to wear partisan gear into the voting place. So if you had like a giant shirt or like a poster that you tried to bring into the polls with you, they would send you away. So usually if something comes up where they're not going to allow you to vote, it would happen before you actually make it all the way in. So yeah, as Valerie said, it's very important once you get your paper back from the machine, check it, put it in the bin, high five the election official from afar, and get your voting sticker. Any other questions? Well, if there's no further questions, is there anything else that can keep them from letting you in? There should be a list on your Secretary of State website of allowed materials of what you can and cannot bring into a voting site.
Most anything else that's not the prohibition on partisan or biased materials, like you can't wear a t-shirt with a candidate's name on it. You can't, but you also can't wear something that is like taking a position on something, that's political. And sometimes they'll even have something you can cover it up with and then you can still vote. But like if you refuse to take the shirt off, or like we had a big problem with hats. People would walk in with hats and they'd be told to take them off and then they would refuse to do so. And so there have been several times when the election authorities have had to call the sheriff's department or somebody to come remove these people from the premises because they refuse to do that. But in general, other than the partisan stuff, really the sort of thing that would keep you from going into anywhere, like, the rest of it is mostly just, behavior-based sorts of things where, if you're being a regular person, you're probably fine.
Potentially they saw you using your phone in the booth, that would be a problem. Like,
even that, I bet they would probably just say, hey, don't do that. I mean, but if you were belligerent about it, it's really the belligerence that's the problem. It's not, like you're going to get a warning before they actually make you leave. And then it's if you continue to do it.
Yeah, and it's also mainly the disturbance to other voters. As you've seen, there's a point at which the partisanship stops. Like in the parking lot, you'll even see like a line at which like the signs or the people that are like, hey, who are you voting for today? Like there's a point at which there's like, kind of a neutral territory that starts at your polling location. It'll be clearly demarcated.
Yeah, 100 feet.
Yep. Do we have any other questions, or is there anything else that popped up in the chat? I don't think so. Well, thank you so much for spending part of your Saturday with us. I hope that everybody has registered to vote, or we'll add that to the top of their voting plan list, and then develop your plan, figure out where you're gonna vote, when you're gonna vote, who you're gonna vote for, make an informed decision. And if you have any questions, feel free to continue leaving us messages on the Facebook feed. We'll check that periodically. The League will be posting their voters guide shortly and hosting more of these civic sessions, and we'll be hosting those candidate forums. I highly recommend candidate forums. It's helpful to hear what people have to say versus what they've had time to kind of research and write. Any other tips before we go, Valerie?
Nope.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.